In our family, we do not say, I love you. We say, be careful. We say, have you eaten? We say, come home. And when those words stop coming, that is when you know someone is already gone.
Adaeze Nwosu, age 67, speaking to her granddaughter on the night before everything changed. The man at the head of the table had not blinked in 4 minutes. 43 people in that room, members of the Park Syndicate, the most quietly powerful Korean business network in all of Toronto, and not one of them breathed above a whisper. Because Hyun Suk Park, 61 years old, third-generation patriarch, a man who had turned his grandfather's dry cleaning empire into a billion-dollar network of legitimate and considerably less legitimate ventures, was staring at a woman nobody in that room had ever seen before. She was standing at the far end of the table. She had not been invited. She was Nigerian. Late 20s, wearing a white button-down shirt tucked into wide-legged black trousers, her natural hair, thick, dark, perfectly shaped, an act of unhurried confidence in a room full of very expensive suits. No jewelry except for 2 small gold studs. No bag, no phone visible, no fear. She had walked through 3 layers of security that should have been, by all known metrics, impassable, and she had spoken in Korean. Not tourist Korean, not app Korean, not the careful, grammatically correct but emotionally hollow Korean of language programs. She had spoken in the dialect of Gyeonggi Province, the one Hyun Suk Park's mother had spoken, the one his children had never learned, the one that existed only in the mouths of a shrinking generation, and apparently in the mouth of this woman standing uninvited at the end of his table. She had said 12 words, and every man in that room had gone still as stopped clocks. What were those 12 words? Stay with us, because to understand what she said, you first have to understand who she is, and to understand who she is, you have to go back to the beginning. Not hers, his. Kang Yeo was not supposed to be in Toronto. He was supposed to be in Seoul, where his father had arranged a position in the family's subsidiary firm, where his mother had already shortlisted 3 suitable women from 3 suitable families, where everything that was expected of the eldest son of the Kang financial empire had been prepared and waiting like a meal going cold. Instead, he was in Kensington Market on a Tuesday in March, wearing a too-thin jacket, eating a breakfast sandwich from a window stall, watching the snow fall on Queen Street West, and feeling for the first time in 32 years something that approximated peace. He had left Seoul 8 months ago. Not dramatically, no shouting match, no midnight departure. He had simply, quietly booked a one-way flight, left a letter, turned off his Korean phone, landed in Toronto with 2 suitcases and a degree from KIST in computational finance that he had never once wanted, and had spent 6 years earning anyway, because wanting things was a luxury his family did not offer. He was here for a reason. The reason was complicated. The reason had a name, but the name could wait. What could not wait was rent, which is why at 8:30 on that Tuesday morning, Kang Yeo walked into the offices of Morale Consulting on King Street West with his CV printed on paper that probably cost too much, and a handshake that his father had drilled into him at age 9. The woman behind the front desk looked him up and down. Mr. Kang? Yes. Miss Chidi is ready for you? He had applied for a financial analyst position. He had not looked up who ran this consultancy. He had not researched the name. He had sent the application at 11 p.m. on a sleepless night and forgotten about it until the call came. He was not prepared. The office at the end of the hall was full of light, west-facing windows, morning sun still climbing, the city spread out below like a map of ambition. The woman behind the desk did not stand when he entered. She was reading something on a tablet, her elbow propped on the armrest of her chair, her chin resting in her palm. "Sit," she said, without looking up. He sat. She finished reading, not performing the reading, actually finishing it, which he respected despite himself, and then set the tablet down and looked at him. Chisam Chidi was 31 years old. She had a face that was extraordinary in its precision, not pretty in the soft, approachable way of women who have been told since childhood that their beauty is their primary asset, but striking in a way that suggested the face had been assembled by someone who took their work seriously. Her eyes were very dark and very direct. Her natural hair was pulled away from her face with a simple band. She wore a structured blazer over a dark dress, and her desk was organized in the way of a person who has absolute clarity about what belongs where and why. She looked at his CV, looked at him. KIST, Computational Finance, top of your cohort. Yes. And then nothing for 8 months. I was transitioning. From Seoul to Toronto? Yes. Why Toronto? The question was asked the way good accountants ask questions, as if the answer already exists somewhere and they are simply waiting for you to stop obscuring it. He said, I needed somewhere my family wouldn't immediately follow. She blinked once. Honest. You seem like someone who prefers it. A pause. She looked at him with an expression she couldn't read, which was unusual. He could read most rooms. Why this firm? Your work on the Equimami Foundation structuring was published in the Financial Post. I read it. It was the most rigorous thing I'd read in 2 years working in an industry that mistakes complexity for intelligence. And you were right about the leveraged asset distribution, and everyone in the comments section was wrong. I wanted to work somewhere with that ratio. A silence. Then something shifted in her expression. Not a smile exactly, but the acknowledgement that a point had been scored. You speak any languages besides Korean and English? Asked she. Mandarin, some Japanese. Igbo? He blinked. No. Yoruba? No. Twi? Amharic? French? French, conversational. She nodded, made a note. I'll need someone who can handle the Korean-facing accounts in our Asia-Pacific portfolio. Complex clients, old money, the kind who communicate entirely in implication and expect you to understand what they actually mean rather than what they say. I was raised by that kind of money, he said. I understand implication fluently. She looked at him for a long moment. The salary is lower than what you'd get at Bay Street. I'm not here for Bay Street. Why are you here? He met her eyes. Because I'm trying to build something that's actually mine, and this seems like the kind of place where that's possible. Another pause, longer this time. You start Monday. Don't be late. He was not late. He was also not prepared for what working alongside Chisam Chidi actually meant, which was, it turned out, working alongside a mind that moved like water, finding the path through every obstacle, not by force, but by relentless, almost organic intelligence. She could read a balance sheet the way musicians read scores, not just the notes, but the intention behind them, the gaps, the things the numbers were built to conceal. And she was, though she hid it with the particular skill of a woman who has learned that warmth in professional spaces is frequently mistaken for weakness, deeply, quietly funny. He discovered this on his 3rd Wednesday when a client called to dispute an invoice, and she handled the entire conversation with a serene patience that only cracked when she hung up and said, entirely deadpan, if he calls again, tell him I've moved to a monastery and taken a vow of financial silence. Kang Yo laughed. She turned, surprised. You have a real laugh, she said, like it was data. Is that unexpected? You've been in this office for 3 weeks, and I've seen you smile exactly twice, both times at the coffee machine, which I found concerning. The coffee machine is genuinely delightful. It has a dial. A dial. People underestimate dials. She looked at him for a beat, then turned back to her screen, but she saw it, the corner of her mouth, the involuntary small curve. He filed it away. He was building a library of her involuntary moments, the ones that slipped past the professional armor. He wasn't sure yet why he was keeping inventory. Drop a comment if you feel this tension building. Tell Tell us, do you see it? Stay with us, because what Chisam is carrying will change everything. Chisam Chidi had not always been Murail Consulting. Murail was her mother's name. Her mother, Adeeze Nwosu, who became Adeeze Chidi when she married at 22, had come to Toronto from Enugu in 1994 with a degree in economics, a husband who worked too hard and loved too loudly, and a stubbornness that her own mother called a curse, and her daughter would later recognize as a survival mechanism so refined that it had become an inheritance. The consultancy had been her mother's idea, started in 2009 in the second bedroom of their Scarborough house, built on Adeeze's 20 years of navigating Toronto's financial landscape as a black woman who knew more than every room she sat in and was paid proportionally less. Then it had grown slowly, the way real things grow, through referrals and results and reputation that couldn't be faked. Then, in 2019, Adeeze had died. Not dramatically. Cancer, the quiet, relentless kind that gave her 4 months of increasingly limited presence and no satisfying narrative arc. What she left Chisam was the firm, the client list, a building on King Street West, 3 notebooks of handwritten strategic analysis that Chisam still consulted like scripture, and a debt. Not a financial debt, something older, something Chisam had never spoken about to anyone in Toronto, something she had spent 10 years being very careful not to let surface. But it had a shape, it had a name, and that name, that specific particular name, had recently reappeared in financial documents crossing her desk. Park Syndicate Holdings. She had recognized it the way you recognize the smell of a house you grew up in. Before your mind has caught up, your body already knows. She had closed the file, opened it again, read it twice more. Then she had sat very still in her office for 11 minutes, looking at the city outside her window, and then she had started building a plan. The plan required a specific kind of access, the kind that couldn't be purchased or negotiated, the kind that had to be earned, or, more precisely, performed. It required someone who could move through the Park Syndicate's world without being immediately visible as a threat. It required, among other things, a Korean national with impeccable financial credentials and absolutely no connection to anyone who would recognize the name Chidi. She had not anticipated that this person would walk into her office of his own accord 3 weeks later, with a CV printed on heavy paper and opinions about dials. She had not anticipated that he would be, and this was the part that made everything considerably more complicated, someone whose company she genuinely enjoyed. Chisam was not a person who enjoyed company easily. She had friends, Nkechi, who was a copyright lawyer and could make anyone laugh, Priya, who ran a bakery and worried about everyone with an intensity that felt like a second career. She had people, but she was also fundamentally someone who had learned to keep the innermost ring of herself very quiet and very private, because the innermost ring was where the grief lived, and the plan, and the thing that had no clean name. Kang Yo had in 6 weeks somehow gotten closer to that ring than anyone in years. Not through charm, he wasn't performing charm, which was the tell. Not through effort, he wasn't working to impress her, which was rarer than it should have been. Simply by being, with a kind of unhurried steadiness, exactly what he appeared to be. A person of considerable intelligence trying genuinely and imperfectly to build something real. It made him useful. It also made him dangerous. She wasn't sure yet which of those things was more true. 6 weeks into his employment, on a Thursday evening in April, Chisam asked Kang Yo to stay after the rest of the staff had left. He sat across from her small conference table. She placed a file in front of him. He opened it, read the first page, then the second, looked up at her. "Park Syndicate Holdings," he said. Yes. This is a prospective client? That depends on what we find in the due diligence. He turned another page. This is a significant account. Yes. Why are you bringing it to me specifically? She looked at him steadily. Because the Korean-facing dimensions of this account requires someone who can read the cultural architecture, not just the numbers. And because, she paused, choosing, I need someone I can trust with the parts of this that aren't in the file. He was very still. What parts aren't in the file? A long silence. My mother, she said, built this firm over 20 years. She had one client she never discussed with me, one account that she managed personally, that she kept separate from everything else. When she died, I found a locked drawer. Inside it, documents, correspondence, a ledger that didn't match any client in our official records. She placed a second, smaller file on the table. The ledger belonged to Park Syndicate Holdings. Kang Yo looked at the file, looked at her. What did they use your mother's firm for? I don't know yet. I need to find out. To do that, I need someone inside, not a spy, not undercover in any dramatic sense, but a financial representative with legitimate credentials who can request access to specific accounts during a formal due diligence process. And you want me to be that person? Yes. He was quiet. Outside, Toronto went about its evening, taxis and streetcars, and the particular end-of-day exhale of a city shaking loose the work week. He asked finally, Why do you need to know? She met his eyes. Because I think they owe her something, and I intend to collect it. Another silence. Different texture from the last. Chisum. It was the first time he'd used her first name. It landed differently than she had expected, with a weight that made her sit slightly straighter. Chisum, what exactly are you planning to do with what you find? The right thing, she said. That's not an answer. No, it's not. He looked at the file for a long moment, then he closed it, pushed it back across the table. She felt something tighten in her chest. Then he said, I'll need to review the full ledger, every document in that drawer. I'll need 2 weeks to develop the financial profile before I walk into any room with the Park Syndicate. And you'll need to tell me, when it matters, what you're actually looking for, not the polished version, the real one. She exhaled slowly. Why are you saying yes? He looked at her with an expression she still didn't have full language for. Because whatever your mother protected for 20 years deserves to be understood. And because, he paused, you trust me with it. I don't take that lightly. She held his gaze for 3 full seconds, then nodded once. Monday, my office, 7 a.m. He stood, picked up his jacket, paused at the door. Chisum. Yes. Whatever this is, I need you to know I'm not doing it because it's useful. I'm doing it because it's right. She said nothing, but after he left, she sat in the empty office for a while, the city glittering below, and felt something shift, very slightly, the way tectonic plates shift in the deep structure of her chest. The meeting with the Park Syndicate was arranged through 3 layers of intermediary, the polite, elaborate choreography of old money that didn't need to hurry. Hyun Suk Park's office suite occupied the 44th floor of a Bay Street tower, the kind of space designed to make visitors feel the specific vertigo of standing inside someone else's absolute authority. Floor-to-ceiling views of Lake Ontario, a boardroom table that seated 24 and was made from a single piece of wood that probably had a name before it became furniture. Kang Yo had come as Myrell Consulting's lead financial representative, accompanied by 2 junior analysts and a brief but immaculate proposal. He had not mentioned Chisum. He had not needed to, because Chisum was already there. She had arrived 40 minutes earlier through the building's secondary entrance, wearing a visitor's badge that had been arranged by a contact she'd spent 3 months cultivating. She was in a conference room 2 floors below, in a meeting about a completely different matter, until she was not. The security guard who tried to stop her at the 44th floor elevator later described her manner as like she belonged there more than any of us. She walked into the boardroom while Hyun-Suk Park was mid-sentence. 43 people, every head turning. She stood at the far end of the table, and then, into the absolute silence of the room, she spoke. 12 words in Gyeonggi dialect, the dialect of Hyun-Suk Park's mother, the dialect that nobody in that room spoke anymore except the man himself. The dialect that existed in only one other document Chisum had ever encountered, her mother's handwritten ledger, in the margins, where Adeze Nuosu had painstakingly transcribed the phonetic sounds of a language she was learning because her client had asked her to, because he had said, "Speak to me in the language of my mother, and I will know you are trustworthy." Chisum had found the ledger. She had found the phonetics. She had spent 4 months learning what they meant. And now she stood at the end of this table and she said, "Your mother's hand smelled of pine resin and rice water. She told you, a debt acknowledged in the mother tongue cannot be refused." The room was absolutely still. Hyun-Suk Park, 61 years old, iron-haired, who had not shown visible emotion in a professional setting in 2 decades, went pale. Then, slowly, with the weight of a man handling something ancient, he stood. "Who are you?" he said, in Korean. "I am Adeze Nuosu's daughter," she replied, in the same dialect, "and I am here to discuss what your family owes mine." Stay with us. This is where everything changes. Hit that subscribe button and drop a comment. Did you see that coming? Because neither did Kang Yo. Kang Yo had gone very, very still. In his professional life, he had been in rooms where power shifted, boardrooms where deals collapsed in seconds, where carefully constructed alliances crumbled under the weight of a single piece of information. He knew what a room looked like when its architecture changed. This was different. This was a room that had been detonated by 12 words and one woman who walked in without an invitation and stood at the far end of a table like she had been there all along, like the table had been placed around her rather than the other way around. He watched Chisum. He watched her stand under the gaze of 43 people, some curious, some hostile, 2 reaching quietly for phones before a gesture from Hyun-Suk Park stopped them, and he watched her face. It was completely calm. Not the calm of detachment, the calm of someone who has been preparing for this moment for years and is now finally in it. The calm of a woman who has paid in advance for every second of this room. He thought of her 6 weeks ago offering him a file across a conference table. "I need someone I can trust with the parts that aren't in the file." He had assumed he understood what that meant. He had been wrong about the scale of it. Hyun-Suk Park spoke again. "Remove everyone." The room emptied with the controlled efficiency of people accustomed to sudden orders, junior members, advisors, Kang Yo's own analysts, all of them moving toward the door. Kang Yo didn't move. Park's eyes moved to him. "You also." "He stays," Chisum said, in English, without turning to look at Kang Yo. "He is my representative. In Korean context, it is customary to conduct sensitive discussions in the presence of a trusted intermediary. You know this." A pause. Park studied her, studied Kang Yo. "Kang," he said, "you are Kang Dae-hyun's son." The air in the room changed again. "Yes," Kang Yo said carefully. "Your father and I have done business." "I know. Does he know you are here?" "No." Another pause. Then Park made a gesture, slight, almost imperceptible, and the last 2 of his men stepped out. 3 people, 1 table as long as a road. "Sit," said he in Sok Park. "Both of you." What followed was 3 hours that Kang Yo would later describe to no one, because there was no one he could yet describe it to, as the most extraordinary conversation he had ever been part of, and the most helpless he had ever felt, because Chisum conducted it entirely in Korean, not stumbling, not searching for words, fluent, strategic, moving between registers with the ease of someone who has spent years not just learning a language, but learning the culture of a language, when to speak formally and when the formality was itself a weapon, when silence meant concession and when it meant contempt, when a question phrased as a courtesy was actually a challenge. She had learned all of this from her mother's notebooks. Adae's Nuosu had spent 20 years learning to navigate the Park Syndicate's world, not as a tool, as an ally, as the one person he and Sok Park's father, the former patriarch, had trusted with the accounts that couldn't appear anywhere official, the accounts that represented the money the family had used to leave behind the things they did in the 1990s that they could never publicly acknowledge. "Your grandfather," Chisum said, her voice level and precise, "used my firm to launder the settlement money, not the main accounts. Those were clean. The secondary stream, the funds that came from the Busan arrangement." Park's expression gave nothing. "That is a serious allegation. It is in the ledger, in my mother's handwriting, in my mother's phonetic transcription of your grandfather's exact words, which he spoke to her in this dialect, so there would be no other witnesses who could understand." A silence. "My mother kept his secret for 20 years, Chisum continued. "She asked for nothing. She was too proud and perhaps too naive to understand that the debt she was accumulating was real, that there would come a day when someone needed to collect it. And that person is you? That person is me. What do you want?" She placed a document on the table, slid it 6 inches toward him. "Not money, information, 3 specific files from the Busan arrangement that will exonerate my mother's name from any connection to the secondary accounts. Her firm is being reviewed by the CRA. Someone submitted an anonymous complaint. I believe that complaint came from within this organization, a junior member covering tracks, most likely without your knowledge." Park looked at the document, then at her. "You are not accusing me. I am asking for your help correcting something that was done in your name without your authority. That is a different request." The first crack appeared in his expression, not warmth, something more complicated, respect, perhaps, the recognition of one careful mind by another. "Why," he said slowly, "should I trust that those documents will not be used against this family?" "Because I am my mother's daughter," Chisum said, "and my mother kept your grandfather's secrets in her drawer for 20 years. That is the only credential I need." They were in the elevator going down before either of them spoke. The city fell away below them, 44 floors of controlled descent, the Lake Ontario view narrowing floor by floor until it disappeared entirely. Kang Yo stood beside her and said nothing until the elevator doors opened to the lobby. Then, "How long?" She knew what he was asking. 4 years, learning the language, building the file, finding the contact who could get through the security. "And the position at Marielle?" "The position at Marielle was real. The work we do is real. But your role?" "I needed a Korean national with legitimate credentials who had no connection to anyone in Park's network." She stopped walking, turned to face him in the lobby, the city's morning traffic audible behind the glass. "Kang Yo, I am telling you that the job was real. What I asked you to help with today, you understood it before you agreed to it." "I understood the outline," he said. His voice was careful, not cold, but careful in a way that was different from his usual steadiness. "I didn't know you were going to walk in that room. I didn't know for certain that I would, until I did." He looked at her for a long moment. "Were you afraid?" The question surprised her. She considered it honestly. "Yes," she said, "but not of him. I was afraid the dialect was wrong, that I'd misread the phonetics, that I'd stand in that room and speak her words and they'd mean nothing." Something in his expression shifted. They weren't nothing. No. He went pale. I know, I watched. You didn't look at me once. I couldn't. I needed to hold the room. I paused. I'm sorry I didn't tell you everything. Don't apologize for it. His voice was quiet. You were protecting something real. I understand that. She searched his face. You're not angry. I'm processing, he said. There's a difference. They stood there in the lobby, around them the ordinary motion of Bay Street morning, professionals with coffee cups, a delivery person with a trolley, the indifferent choreography of a city going about its isthmus. My father, Kang Yo said, finally, did business with Park's organization, not the legitimate arm. She grew still. I know. You know? I found it in the secondary ledger. Your family's firm appeared twice, small amounts, peripheral. She met his eyes. You are not your father. No, he said quietly, but I came to Toronto in part because I knew there were things he was connected to that I couldn't defend, that I didn't want to inherit. And now? He looked at her steadily. Now I'm standing in a lobby wondering how I ended up in the middle of exactly that and feeling somehow like it's exactly where I should be. She didn't smile, but her eyes did something, a softening, an opening, the involuntary kind. Come and eat something. I know a place on Dundas, Nigerian. My mother used to take me there. He held the door for her. Will you tell me about her? She walked through into the cool spring air. Yes, she said. I'll tell you everything. Are you still here? Comment below. Tell us what you feel right now. Share this with someone because what comes next is where they stop circling and start falling. The restaurant on Dundas was called Mama's Arithmetic, her mother's joke, her mother's naming from the days when a consulting firm felt impossible and feeding people felt like the one thing that made uncomplicated sense. They took a corner table. Chisum ordered without looking at the menu. Egusi soup, pounded yam, grilled fish, zobo for both of them because the April cold still clung to her bones. He looked at the food when it arrived with the particular attention of someone encountering a new language and wanting to learn it properly. Show me. She tore a small piece of the yam, shaped it, dipped it, showed him the motion, watched him try, fail, try again, did not laugh, did not perform patience, was simply patient, which was different. Your mother taught you to cook this, he said. She taught me everything. She used to say, Chisum, learn the language of a place before you try to change it. Food is the first language. Is that why you learned the dialect? She looked at her bowl. I found the notebooks 3 months after she died. The language lessons were at the back. Pages and pages of phonetics, translations, cultural notes. She was so thorough, so careful. A pause. I was angry at first that she'd spent all that energy on them and never told me, never prepared me for any of it. And then I realized she had prepared me, just not in the way I expected. Every conversation we had about business, about integrity, about what it means to protect something for someone who cannot protect it themselves, that was the preparation. She looked up. She trusted me to figure out the rest. Kang Yo was quiet. He had learned, she had noticed this and cataloged it, to let her sentences finish entirely before he spoke, not the performative listening of someone waiting for their turn, actual listening. My grandmother, he said, was the only person in my family who used language that way, who understood that what you say and how you say it and to whom, all of it carries weight. My father used words like tools, efficient, aimed. My grandmother used them like, she used to say, words are bridges. Every one you choose is a plank. You choose poorly enough times and the bridge falls and then you cannot cross back. She sounds like someone worth knowing. She's the reason I left Seoul, not her specifically, but her way of seeing things. I kept hearing her voice when my father spoke about obligation and inheritance and what the family required. His hands were around the zobo glass. Both hands, she noticed. He always held glasses with both hands. Your voice would say, "Is this what you actually want, or is this what you've been told to want for so long you've forgotten the difference?" Chisom set down her spoon. "When did you stop being able to tell the difference?" He considered. University. Possibly earlier. I was good at everything they asked me to be good at. I won the awards they wanted me to win. I came first in the cohort they pointed me toward. It was only when I stopped, in Toronto the first week just walking, that I realized how long I'd been moving at someone else's pace. "Are you walking at your own now?" He looked at her. "I'm starting to." The restaurant hummed around them. Someone was cooking in the back kitchen, the smell of tomato and palm oil threading through the warm air. A grandmother at a table nearby was feeding a small child with the absorbed tenderness of someone who has done this before and is doing it this time better, with more patience. "Chisom," Chisom said. "Yes." "Why did you really say yes in my office when I asked?" He turned his glass slowly. "Because you were the only person I'd met in 8 months who seemed to be building something that mattered for reasons that weren't about the building." A pause. "Most people I've worked with, they build because building is the point, the thing itself. You build because there's something behind it, something that deserves to exist." She looked at him carefully. "That could describe my obsession with my mother's case. It describes everything about you," he said simply. "The firm, the clients you turn down, the ones you take at half rate because you believe in the work, the notebooks on your desk you think no one notices." A pause. "The way you learned a dying dialect to stand in a room and speak someone's truth back to them." She was very still. "I notice everything. I've been noticing since the first interview." "That's either reassuring or alarming." "Possibly both." She looked at him for a long moment, then picked up her spoon. "Eat. The agouti is getting cold and my mother's ghost will be disappointed in me if I let you waste it." He smiled. "The real one, chest deep, unhurried. We can't have that." 3 weeks after the meeting on the 44th floor, Hyun-Suk Park delivered on his word. The 3 files arrived through legal counsel, redacted where necessary, complete where it mattered. They were enough. More than enough. Chisom handed them to her accountant on a Friday afternoon, and by Tuesday, the CRA complaint had been addressed and Mireille Consulting's file cleared. She sat in her office that Tuesday evening after everyone had gone. The city spread below, Lake Ontario silver in the early dusk. She had expected to feel finished. She had expected the particular relief of a long-held thing finally set down. Instead, she felt unmoored, as if the weight she'd been carrying had also been the thing keeping her anchored. She heard the office door. Kang Yo stood in the entrance of her office with 2 cups of takeout tea, the kind from the Thai place on Adelaide, with too much condensed milk, the kind she'd once mentioned liking when she was tired. "I saw your light," he said, from the lobby. "You were in the lobby?" "I forgot my charger." "That's not true. I was checking you were all right." She looked at the tea, then at him. "It's done." "I know. I saw the email." "I thought I'd feel resolved." And instead, she turned her chair to face the window. Empty. Not in a bad way. More like the room after a long party before you start cleaning up. That specific quiet. He sat in the chair across from her desk, didn't offer solutions, didn't perform concern, just sat, his cup in both hands, watching the view she was watching. "Your mother would have been relieved," he said finally. "Yes." She would have also had something to say about the fact that it took her daughter 4 years and one Korean man she hired for suspicious reasons to accomplish it. Chisom laughed. The unexpected kind, the kind that arrived before she could manage it. She would have said, "Chisom, you overcomplicated it. You always overcomplicate it. You could have just asked." Could you have? No, they never would have met me without the access, without the credentials, without you. He turned his cup. I'm glad I was useful. Don't do that. He looked up. Don't make it functional, she said quietly. You know that's not what I mean. A silence, longer than their usual silences, which were already longer and more comfortable than most. Chisum, he said, what do you want after this? Not the firm, not the next client. You specifically. What do you want? The question arrived the way his questions always did, without warning, without softening, but somehow without sharpness, just the question placed carefully between them. She thought of her mother, of the notebooks, of 20 years of a woman who worked and built and protected and never once, as far as Chisum could find in any of the pages she'd read, wrote down what she herself wanted. I want, she said slowly, to stop being so careful. He was very still. I've been careful for 4 years, careful about the plan, careful about the firm, careful who gets close enough to matter. She looked at her cup. I'm tired of managing my own life like it's a risk assessment. What would you do if you weren't managing it? She looked at him, directly, with the same look she'd given the 44th floor boardroom. No performance, no softening, just what was true. I have thought about you every day since you walked into my office and said that thing about dials. A silence. About dials? You were completely serious about dials, and I thought, this is either someone I need to be very cautious about or someone I never want to stop talking to. Which was it? Both, she said. Still both. He set his cup down, stood, and then, without hurry, without theatrics, with the same careful deliberateness he brought to everything, walked around the desk to where she sat. He didn't reach for her. He simply stood close enough that she could feel the warmth of him, and he looked at her like she was the whole room, and the room had not yet understood what it contained. I have wanted to be the kind of person you let stay since approximately the 3rd week when you said that thing about the ratio of intelligence to complexity. That was about a financial report. I know. It was still the most attractive thing I'd ever heard. She stood. They were very close now, her eyes level with his chin, his hands still at his sides, both of them entirely still in the way of people who have been in motion for so long that stillness feels like its own acceleration. Kang Yo, she said. Yes. You are either the best decision I've made in 4 years or a significant complication. I know. I'm hoping for both. He kissed her. Not frantically, not as a conclusion to some long-building performance, but the way you finally open a door you've been standing in front of for months, quietly, with intention, with the full understanding that what's on the other side of it is going to change the shape of everything. He kissed her back with both hands cupping her face, the same way he held everything, with both hands, completely. And outside, the city moved on without them, indifferent and magnificent. The weeks that followed did not resolve into simplicity. Nothing real does. There was the conversation about his father's peripheral involvement in the park accounts, a conversation that lasted 3 hours over bad takeout on her kitchen floor, that required honesty she hadn't asked for and he gave anyway, that ended not with resolution, but with the agreement to hold it as a question they would answer together over time. There was the call from his mother in Seoul, which he took at the kitchen table while Chisum pretended to read in the next room, and heard his voice drop into formal Korean, and then, gradually, into something softer. He told her he was staying in Toronto. He told her he was building something. He told her there was a woman. His mother asked if the woman was Korean. He said, "She is extraordinary. That is the only relevant fact." Chisum heard this through the wall and pressed her lips together very hard. There was the night she showed him her mother's notebooks, all of them, not just the financial ones, the ones where Adaze Nusu had written in the particular small hours honesty of someone who believes no one will read it. I am building this firm so Chisum will never have to choose between who she is and what she needs. I am building it so she inherits options, not obligations. Kang Yo read those pages in silence. When he finished, he put the notebook down with the same care he'd give something sacred. She knew you, he said. Yes. She built everything with you in mind. Yes. Chisam's voice was steady, mostly. Then this, he gestured between them, at the firm, at the cleared file, at the spring light coming through the window, at everything, is exactly what she built it for. She looked at him. Don't make me cry before breakfast. Noted, he said, and stood to make tea. 6 months later, at a small gathering of Mireille Consulting's closest clients, a dinner in the private room of a Kensington Market restaurant, her mother's favorite neighborhood, Chisam gave a short speech. She spoke about her mother, about what it means to build something not for legacy but for love, about the difference between inheriting obligation and inheriting possibility. Kang Yo sat 3 seats away and watched her the way he always watched her, like she was the whole room and the room had not yet understood what it contained. After dinner, outside on Augusta Avenue, the June night warm and full of sound, a busker somewhere, someone's open window spilling old Fela Kuti, he took her hand. Do you know what the 12 words were, he said, the exact 12 you spoke to Park? Of course. Tell me. She looked at him, her mother's gold studs in her ears, the firm her mother built carrying her name, the notebooks on her bookshelf, the man beside her who held everything with both hands. She said the words again, quietly, just for him, in the Gingji dialect that a woman from Enugu had taught herself from phonetic transcription in a locked drawer. Your mother's hands smelled of pine resin and rice water. She told you, a debt acknowledged in the mother tongue cannot be refused. He was quiet for a moment. You know what the 13th word would be, he said. What? He looked at her. Yours. She held his gaze for a long moment. Then she said in Igbo, her grandmother's Igbo, her mother's Igbo, her own, a single word that meant yes, and finally, and I have been waiting for someone who understood the whole sentence. He didn't speak Igbo, but he understood. If you stayed until the last word, this story was made for you. Not because you believe love is simple, but because you understand that the real thing is built slowly in the spaces between courage and fear, in languages you teach yourself for the sake of someone who deserved better, in offices and restaurants and kitchen floors and elevators descending 44 floors towards something that was always going to matter. Subscribe to Afro-Korean Soul Stories. Share this with someone who has been carrying something too long, someone who needs to be reminded that the debt we owe the people who loved us first is best paid forward. Chisam's mother built a bridge. Chisam crossed it. That is the whole story. Thank you for being here.